CEE,
Central Europe Explained,
an IDM podcast series
powered by Erste Group.
Episode 53, Future Enlargement. Welcome to Central Europe Explained. My name is Francesco Danieli and I'll be your host for today's episode. Last time we traveled in the past and explored the profound impact of the 2004 EU enlargement. Today, we turn our attention to the future. The European Council made a significant decision at the end of 2023 to open accession negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. This move was praised, but it also opened many questions for the future of Europe. What are the benefits of the enlargement? What are the challenges and how can we overcome them? To tackle this subject, we have a special guest. He is an expert on EU enlargement and has written many articles and papers on the subject. He is also our director here at the IDM. Welcome to Sebastian Schäffer. It's nice to have you here again.
Thank you very much.
So, I'd like to start with a little memory game to get to know you better and set the stage for our discussion. I'll say a few words related to the EU enlargement, and you share the first memory or thought that comes to your mind. Are you ready?
All right.
So, the first one is Europe in 2004.
Big Bang enlargement.
Accession treaty.
Complicated.
Ukraine.
Future of Europe.
Unity.
Currently in question.
Negotiations.
Taking too long.
And future of the European Union.
Will be decided in Ukraine.
Great insights. Thank you for sharing, Sebastian. I think now we are ready to just dive deep into our conversation. So, at the IDM, you are the expert on this topic, but this interest goes back in time, even before you came to Vienna. How was your first approach to this subject? What made it so attractive to you?
Well, thank you for the question. It's something that I discovered basically during my studies. I was part of a association back then and participated in their student conferences on the simulation of how decisions are done in the European Union, but also in NATO. And I remember when I dove deeper into European integration, I thought, well, if this wouldn't exist, we would really need to invent something like that. I was fascinated by the idea of further integration, enlargement, unity in diversity, and the overall consequences that the founding fathers and also mothers of the European integration took from the devastating effects of the Second World War. And I think this is something that is often forgotten, and we're not done yet. So, this is my earliest memory on that topic.
Then, 10 years ago, you moved to Vienna. When you became the director of IDM in 2019, maybe enlargement was not one of the European Union's top priorities. We were still dealing with a divorce with the United Kingdom. And after Brexit, not many people wanted to bring someone new to the table. Now, 5 years later, we are talking about enlargement as one of the priorities for the new European Parliament and for the new Commission. Why this change? How do you feel about it?
I think that we made a grave mistake over the past decades that we have neglected the topic of enlargement. And I've mentioned that a couple of times now. I think it's a weird thing to announce what is not going to happen in your political tenure. And we had the situation when Jean-Claude Juncker became president of the European Commission that he announced in his term there will be no enlargement. Normally you would say what you want to implement. And I think this would be something that the next Commission should really be announcing. And you mentioned Brexit and the challenges of this divorce. I would like to mention here that I also believe we took the wrong conclusions out of it, because Brexit ultimately was three different tasks interconnected with each other. We did only two. The first one was, of course, we called it divorce. I think it's the right description. So how to untangle what has been grown since 1973. Then how to deal with each other in the future. How do we work together in various fields that we've just untangled? And the third thing would have been how to work internally together within the European Union, and what is the consequence? And the consequence out of this should have been to say, okay, we take this unprecedented event that, by the way, was only possible because we introduced the Treaty of Lisbon. Before that, it was not possible to exit the European Union. And what is the lesson that we learn from this, and how do we make it better? And the lesson would not be, well, we just continue as we've done in the past. The lesson should have been, we want to either focus on a specific direction with maybe fewer countries, but more pointed into what is functioning well, or the lesson is we take this as an opportunity to reform and then finally enable also enlargement again. Because what we've been doing basically for the past decade was saying we need to reform in order to enlarge. We do not talk about reform, so therefore we cannot enlarge. And this is basically a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we need to break this cycle. And I see certain indications that we're going in this direction, but of course there needs more to be done.
Over time, you had the opportunity to meet many people who will be deeply affected by the enlargement. At the IDM, we often host guests, for example, coming from Ukraine and Moldova. In your opinion, what do they think about joining the European Union? Is it more of an opportunity or a challenge for them?
I think the people that I'm talking to realize that it is, of course, a huge opportunity, because the door was not open for a long time. Not only for those countries, although I've always argued for that the countries of the Eastern Partnership should at least get the same perspective as it has been offered to the Western Balkan countries back in 2003. On the other hand, of course, if you give that promise and you don't follow through, then you create a lot of disencouragement and, of course, a lot of disappointment. I think that, again, we have now a situation where there is a great opportunity, but with this opportunity, there also come a lot of challenges, because fulfilling the Copenhagen criteria is not an easy task. There is a reason why it takes some time until you can become a member. And this can often be a very technical and very excruciating process. And therefore, I think the people I'm talking to is, we want to do our homework, we want to progress, we are aware of the challenges, but please help us and do not throw sticks and stones in our direction, which unfortunately oftentimes has happened due to the fact that single member states are too much involved in the overall process. Opening and closing chapters requires unanimity in the European Council. That's absurd. Why can single member states block progress here? What's the reason behind that? And the even more absurd thing, this is not something that is codified in the treaties. This is just practice that has been implemented. And if you look at why progress has stalled in the past years, it's not due to actual topical challenges with regards to, for instance, certain chapters, but more due to internal politics in those member states that are exploiting or even extorting these other countries. And finally, the last chapter that was closed was in June 2017 with Montenegro, and this is really not something we as as the European Union should be proud of. We should drive that much further, much quicker forward. And then at the end of this process, there's still a possibility to veto it if you really deem it necessary, but not throughout the progress, especially if it's not related to the topics that are negotiated.
So you mentioned the Western Balkans, and I would like to keep talking about them because we recently worked together on a paper discussing this issue of the enlargement and of the length of the enlargement for these countries. In this paper, we explained, for example, how the longest negotiations to enter the European Union took almost 7 years, which is the case of Portugal between 1978 and 1985. But if we look at the Balkans, Serbia and Montenegro, for example, already surpassed this amount of time, because the negotiations with Montenegro were open in 2012, so 12 years ago at this point, while those with Serbia in 2014, so 10 years ago. Other countries, such as Albania and North Macedonia, only recently had the possibility of starting the negotiations after many years because of those vetoes posed by the member states, as you mentioned before. Do you think that these countries may feel left behind at this point?
Of course. I mean, it's a two-way street. If we would have the situation that one or more of those countries would have fulfilled all the Copenhagen criteria, I think the pressure would have been different for EU member countries to block progress. I'm not saying that it wouldn't have happened, because you can never be certain of anything, not only in terms of European integration. But however, the frustration, of course, must be there if you change the name of your country, in the case of Macedonia or now North Macedonia, and you still cannot progress, because then other countries come and demand something from you. And again, I mean, if we look at, as you mentioned, how long negotiations already are taken with a country like Montenegro, which is tiny in population size, which is really not something that is a challenge. Once again, if they would have reformed faster, the pressure would have been different, but the incentive is also really not there. We should be ashamed that there will be a new record that is shattering the history of length of negotiations took in the history of European integration. Even worse if we, for instance, look at Turkey, but that's a whole different situation, of course. Enlargement was and is the most successful policy of the European Union. We have always benefited from enlargement. The majority of enlargement rounds was to stabilize democracies, which makes our direct neighborhood more safe, more prosperous, and we have also always economically benefited from opportunities that are arising from European integration. And we are not talking about this. We are always talking about the challenges and what we potentially could lose, and there's a lot of fears going on, and none of these fears has ever materialized. That again would not exclude that it cannot be the case in the future, and I think the situation with the current candidate countries is very diverse and very challenging. But again, if we put it into perspective, the number of inhabitants in all these 9 countries, Western Balkan 6 plus Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, the associated trio, is 67 million, and this is almost to the person the same amount that the United Kingdom has. Now, of course, you could argue now that the United Kingdom has 10 times the amount of GDP than those 9 countries. But again, I would argue, if we take brave and bold steps that I think are necessary in European integration, we would achieve an environment that would give us an opportunity to benefit from that in the security realm, but also economically, gradually, in both sides, And if we look back at 2004, this has been solid proof that this does work. And I would be optimistic that it also would work with the current candidate countries.
But now, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, now that the EU's focus has shifted towards Ukraine and Moldova for obvious reasons, don't you believe that the Western Balkans are losing hope, maybe, about their own accession prospects, because of this shift in attention, which probably impacts their expectations and aspirations, maybe, for the future?
There is, again, two sides to that story. I would say, on the one hand side, of course, the opportunity to bring enlargement forward is also an opportunity for the Western Balkan countries. People who have been drawn the attention to that. Ironically, the biggest advocate for EU enlargement is sitting in the Kremlin, because this is a direct result of the Russian aggression towards Ukraine. On the other hand, of course, the signal that has been sent by the European Commission and also the member states is that we will shift our attention to you if there is a violent conflict. And this is not a very good signal to be sending to the Western Balkans, because for them, ultimately, that could mean if there is an escalation, there will be more approximation. And this is something that the EU, but also the Commission, could have avoided if they would have given a perspective of membership also to, for instance, the associated trio.
Well, continuing on this discourse, then what should the European Union do about this? Which recommendations would you give to the next Commission?
One of the major points is going to be we need to find a new security architecture on the European continent. It's clear that security on the continent will not be organized with, but rather against the Russian Federation and the other proxies that the Kremlin still might have. Which means safeguarding the continent and safeguarding prosperity will be best suited through European integration. Of course, not each and every country will want to become a member, and not each and every country can become a member. So, on the one hand, the lesson should be we need to be steadfast towards the Russian aggression, continue with the support to Ukraine as long as it is necessary. We should do much more in terms of supporting not only financially but also militarily. And what we also need to do is bring, of course, enlargement forward, but this comes with prerequisites, because Article 42.7 of the Treaty of the European Union requires countries to use all means necessary to defend an attacked country. We are not able to provide this, so this is why we need NATO structures in order to enable this still. There's, of course, the big caveat of what is going to happen in November, but I think we don't have the time to dive into this. But ultimately, we would also need to find a possibility to discuss these kind of things without immediate enlargement, which will, even if we try to speed up the process, there is no shortcuts. It's not possible. The treaties are not allowing this. So we would need to find a different format. And I think one of the things that we've proposed here with our friend and colleague from the University of Osnabrück, Ulrich Schneckener, is the Greater European Council, where we think that a forum where we have the possibility to meet with countries that want to become a member, countries that were a member, and countries that do not want to become a member, would be a suitable link to the EU architecture that could work as serving the first purpose, organize security again on the European continent that the OSCE is unfortunately unable to do, and also provide a seat at the table that would enable a smoother transition process from becoming a candidate country to becoming a full member of the European Union.
Thank you very much for these recommendations. I think they are very interesting for whoever wants to deepen into this topic. So, to conclude this conversation, for those who would like to explore this topic further, there is a large amount of related content on our website, as you know. And do you have any advice on where they should start? Or do you think there are specific publications from the IDM that they might find insightful?
Well, on the one hand side, of course, the policy paper, but also an expanded article that I've written with Ulrich can be found on the IDM website. What is also a possibility is to click on our interactive map and look at not only the candidate countries, but all of the 20 of the target countries that the IDM has. And there you will find a lot of information on what we've been doing here. But one important point is always for us also the network. So we've been cooperating with various other institutions in this regard, and we will continue to do so. So I highly recommend to also look at our partner institutions that have been working on various aspects. There is the staged accession that has been proposed. There is a different format where we focus on rather integration of the European Economic Area. There's various ideas out there. I think the most important thing is not to gatekeep and to advocate the idea that comes from a specific institution. The overall point would be to finally pick up the discussion, bring back deepening and widening together again, and use this as a start of the conversation. And ultimately, then it doesn't matter which idea comes through, as long as we talk about what possibilities are out there rather than what challenges we have.
Also, at the end of every episode, we used to recommend a piece of art related to the topic. And in this case, I know you have written a book about this topic. So could you please tell us more about it and where or how we can get it?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to do some self-advertisement. In this case, there is indeed an idea that I've developed a little bit earlier, back in 2021, with our late chairman Erhard Busek, where we advocate for the immediate accession of the Western Balkan countries. This book can be, of course, bought in bookstores. It's written in German. There is a policy paper that sums up the ideas behind it in English on our website, but there's also an audiobook version of that, and you find it in the same podcast app as you're listening to this episode. And the book is called Balkan, nach, Europa, Sofort.
Thank you, and thank you to our dear listeners for tuning in to this episode of Central Europe Explained. Stay tuned for more discussions and insights soon.
Thank you.
This was CEE, Central Europe Explained, a podcast series produced by the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe. If you enjoyed listening to us, make sure to subscribe to the IDM podcast series on your favorite podcast platform. Additionally, you can explore our other work on our website www.idm.at. If you have any feedback or if you're interested in collaborating on a podcast episode, please do not hesitate to contact us through our social media channels at IDM Vienna, or write us an email to idm@idm.at.
IDM Podcast.
Institut für den Donauraum und Mitteleuropa.
Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe.
European perspectives.
Regional actions.
Cooperation and expertise since 1950.
1953.